Last week, the Jewish people opened not one, but two books of Numbers. On Shabbat, we began the biblical book of Numbers with a census of our ancestors. And last Tuesday, the Pew Research Center unveiled a more modern take on the book of Numbers, a long-awaited census of today's American Jewish community. In 2013, during my first semester of rabbinical school, Pew released its first study of America's Jews, which resulted in this doomsday headline in the New York Times. The first major survey of American Jews in more than 10 years finds a significant rise in those who are not religious, marry outside the faith, and are not raising their children Jewish. The intermarriage rate has reached a high of 58%. It's a very grim portrait of the health of the American Jewish population. Needless to say, this was not exactly an inspiring story for an aspiring rabbi to read. Pew was nothing less than an earthquake in the world of Jewish community professionals. And if I had a nickel for every time someone mentioned that study during my first year of rabbinical school, I could have retired before ordination. Those numbers, however, are old news. Now, thanks to Pew 2, we have new ones. In Hebrew, the book of Numbers is called Bamidbar, meaning in the wilderness. And just as one can get lost in the wilderness, so too can one get lost in 248 pages of statistics. So this evening, allow me to be your guide through the wilderness of Pew's book of Numbers. Don't worry, it's not going to take 40 years, because our journey is going to have 5 highlights. Highlight number 1, the basic census. The size of the American Jewish community kept pace with overall American population growth. This may come as a shock to you, but the majority of Americans are not Jewish. I know, it's shocking. Pew estimates that Jews represent 2.4% of the American population, totaling about 7.5 million people. There's a saying that the Jews are just as like everybody else, only more so. And just as America as a whole is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, so too is its Jewish community. 8% of Jewish Americans identify as Hispanic, Black, Asian, or some other non-white racial or ethnic category. And more significantly, that percentage nearly doubles in the youngest age bracket, rising to 15% for Jews under 30. And while we're on the topic of Jews under 30, in addition to that 15% who self-identify as people of color, nearly 30% live in households in which at least one person identifies as a person of color. In her Kol Nidre sermon this past year, Rabbi Buchdahl called upon us to think of the Jewish people as a family, and we're going to be able to hug each other again very soon. And Pew's new book of Numbers paints a portrait of our family, of our people, that is growing and glowing with more and more diversity. And that's a trend to celebrate. Highlight number 2. The intermarriage rate isn't the headline. The rate of intermarriage has been the hold your breath statistic of the Jewish community and its surveys for decades. And in 2021, it wasn't. it's about time. I think that there are 3 reasons we aren't talking about the rate of intermarriage this time around. First, it hasn't changed since 2013, and the world didn't end. Second, the ferocity of the opposition has evaporated. Case in point, nearly 90% of American Jews approve of rabbis and cantors officiating at interfaith weddings. Nearly 90%. Third, and most significant of all, as it turns out, most intermarried couples have Jewish families. Nearly 70% of families with one Jewish parent are raising their children to have Jewish identities. So while we still have a way to go on this journey, these numbers indicate that we have made tremendous progress. Highlight number 3. The state of Reform Judaism is strong. The Reform movement is still the largest branch of American Judaism, representing 37% of our community. Still, there is some cause for concern. Only 13% of Reform Jews say that their religious faith provides them with a great deal of meaning and fulfillment in their lives. As a point of comparison, 46% of Reform Jews report that they get a great deal of meaning and fulfillment, and Shelby and Zach know this, from their pets. Those of you who have met, I know this too, because for those of you who have met my dog Rashi on Coffee with Clergy, you are highly aware that she is a delight in my life. But clearly, Reformed Jewish leaders, myself included, have to do more to make the work of her medieval rabbinic namesake a source of meaning for the members of our communities. Highlight number 4. Our bonds with our fellow Jews are strained. And it's not just because only 9% of Orthodox Jews say they get meaning from their pets. It's a bit more complicated than that. Half of Orthodox Jews say that they have not much or nothing at all in common with Reform Jews. Half. And guess what? 60% of Reform Jews feel this same divide. Not to be left out, about a third of conservative Jews have similar feelings of detachment from Jews in the other large denominations. Unfortunately, there aren't many bright spots to report here, except that 85% of Jewish Americans say that they feel at least some belonging to the Jewish people. And half say they feel a great deal of belonging to the Jewish people. My hope is that between this Pew survey and the next one, awareness of this growing gap between us will finally direct the Jewish community's attention to these troubling divisions in our intra-faith relations. Finally, highlight number 5. While the 2013 Pew study did not ask about anti-Semitism, this year's did. And predictably, the results were devastating. 75% of Jewish Americans reported that they think there is more anti-Semitism in the United States today than there was 5 years ago. And more than half report feeling less personally safe today because of it. More than half. That said, in striking contrast, 62% of American Jews say that sharing Jewish culture and holidays with their non-Jewish friends is one of the key ways they express their Jewish identity, which means that in spite of concerns about rising bigotry, Jewish Americans regularly share their delights in their Jewishness with their loved ones. That's certainly cause for hope. So there is a whole lot more to discover in the wilderness of this year's Pew Study, and I definitely encourage everyone to take a little wander through it. But to conclude, I want to offer a final thought on the very idea of this kind of project of counting Jews. The biblical term for census taking actually opens this week's Torah portion, Naso. God commands Moses, Naso et Rosh, take a census. Literally, however, the word Naso means to lift, and the word Rosh means head, which means that this turn of phrase has a simply beautiful, if we go literal, translation: to lift up heads. To lift up heads. Is there a better way to describe what a good census does? Because when we lift up our heads to be counted ourselves, we can't help but see the other people around us. And when we do that, we see that they count too. And counting leads to curiosity, which leads to richer community. My hope is that this year's Pew Study will call upon us to lift up our heads, to better see our fellow American Jews, and that when we learn about each other from Pew's Book of Numbers, that will be one more step on our journey through the wilderness to the promised land together. Shabbat Shalom.